Howdy. Welcome to Monday, the last Monday in June 2021. We're never going to be here again. It is warm out there, to say the least, but it was warmer in Portland today than it was in Reading, and that never happens. Supposedly Canada hit 116 today. Never happened in the history of the world. So for you climate deniers, you might want to rethink that. Today we're going to be covering, it's chapter 26 in the book. How many of you really have the book? It's on page 177 or so, thereabouts. If you're following along, it might help. So far, everything seems to be running okay. We're into our, we're going to be working on our third essay this week. Oh, that's what you guys are working on. I want to sign another one until later. So don't worry about that yet. And I might start a discussion, though. I think I will today on music. Do you listen to music? Do you like music? Do you understand music? Do you have any historical reference for music, or do you just like what's current right now? Do you know where that came from? Well, we're going to explore that pretty heavily this week. I'm going to have you guys watch a documentary, one or two parts at least. It's a BBC documentary on the origins of music, Western music. And things are starting to happen in this era of this chapter we're looking at right now. It's about, covers 150 years, 120 years, from 1700 to 18. So we're climbing up the ladder, getting into modern times. Not yet, of course, but things are happening in the world. Well, in the music world, instruments are being invented like crazy. Before this era, you could not essentially have a symphony because there was not that many instruments. Yes, there was primitive versions of pianos and some violins and cellos, but when it came to French horns, clarinets, trumpets, flutes, it was pretty limiting. But things are starting to happen because we now have the modern age where we have industrialization, where we have people who are craftsmen who can make this stuff. And so this definitely, with that came composers. During this era, some classical composers, many are starting to rear their head. That was the sophisticated music of the day. It wasn't folk music, folks. It was sophisticated, orchestrated music. And you had to understand music, not to appreciate the sound of it, but in order to write a symphony, you have to understand a lot about music theory. So, and the two main characters of this era are going to be Mozart, Amadeus Mozart. Maybe you've heard of that person. And soon there followed Ludwig van Beethoven. And they changed the course of history. We're looking at things throughout this, maybe you've already sensed it in your essays, of people who changed. They were world shakers. Martin Luther, Shakespeare. They changed the course of the trajectory of humans by giving us a mirror to look at ourselves, holding up a mirror of understanding and deep philosophical changes in the existential question that we're still all answering or asking ourselves. Maybe you aren't, but I bet you have. Why are we here? Why do I exist? To what purpose? It's the existential question. That's what Shakespeare was dealing with, and to be or not to be. Do you think we were just here to, like my favorite punk rock band from the 80s? They're called the Godfathers. They're from England, by the way. You probably never heard of them. And they had a great album called Birth, School, Work, Death. That's supposed to be funny, folks, but it's also terrifying. Because if that's all there is, no wonder there's so many drug addicts and alcoholics and people who don't seem to have a purpose. You got to give it to the punks. They're saying it out in 3 chords, yelling it, screaming into the wind of complacency. Well, in his day, Mozart was a punk. Absolutely. He was a child prodigy. They don't even know where talent like that. You're born with that. He supposedly is writing his own symphonies. There's orchestras when he was 10 years old, some crazy thing. Piano player, but he's also a brat, spoiled because he knew he was talented. And he didn't quite fit in. In those days, you had to have a financial backer, usually a wealthy person or an aristocrat or a somebody high up in the aristocracy, queen, prince, princess, something like that. And he upset a lot of people. And he didn't know how to play the game. And yes, it was still playing the game in those days to get money. Just like when I asked you to write about the Dutch painters, Rembrandt got sick and tired of playing the game and wanted to paint what he wanted to paint, and he went broke. Because people only wanted what they wanted him to paint. Does that sound familiar? That's what we're doing now in our culture. You will make the movie we want you to make. We will give you financing to write a book if we want you to write the book about the subject we want. It's harder and harder to be an individual now as an artist and make some sort of financial living. And look at music right now. How do you make your living off music? We're going to get into new music later on, a couple more weeks. It's not easy anymore. In the old days, you could make a record, sell some records, be on the radio. Now, nobody buys records very much. They don't make very much money on this stuff. People want it to be given away free. You want to download all your music for free. Well, if that was the way it is, is that where we are? And so now, as a culture, when it comes to music, we expect a lot of our artists. We want them to post their YouTube videos. We want them to constantly be spending money. Now, where do they get that money? Unless we pony up some money and pay for the music. This year's been a bad year for performances because of the pandemic. No musicians making any money this year. Not even big musicians. They're living off their old savings if they have some. The bands I follow need to be on the road playing small clubs to eke out a living. And that was impossible this year. So they've been hunkered down, but things are opening up. Concert venues are starting to thrive again. Not quite, but starting to. And people are chomping at the bit to get out there, to play live music, to perform for us, an audience. and hopefully they could sell some merch and keep making a living somehow. Well, it was really hard to make a living as a musician when Mozart was around. There was no national touring. They're not on a bus touring the country. They mostly stayed in their city they were born in. If they're lucky to be born in a city that was Vienna, or Paris, Rome, Florence, where there was a hub of activity. The Netherlands, England, of course. And so, but in his day, Mozart was definitely a rock star. He was. He was treated as such, and he became, because he was so young, he misbehaved. He was naughty. He was like the Rolling Stones before there was the Rolling Stones. If that makes sense to you. You even know who the Rolling Stones is? Who can I compare it to? Justin Bieber. Ugh. I just compared Mozart to Justin Bieber. Not really, but I'm saying the adulation he got, the star treatment he got was similar. Remember, there was no cell phones, no internet, nothing. It's all word of mouth. Most people in their life heard Mozart's music being played but never saw him. But he did perform for kings and queens and rich people. That's where he made his money. And he kind of mocked them in his day. Anyway, watch the documentary on music. I'll post it a little later tonight, rather at 7:30 here. I'm a late starter. I don't like mornings or afternoons, especially not so hot. So, what else was happening during this time of the season? Well, lots of modern things are starting to be developed besides musical instruments. How about this? The first flush toilet. Do you think flush toilets were always here? Are you used to a flush toilet? It's in before 1775 there was no flush toilets. Think about that, folks. Outhouses, waste materials. We're living next to waste. So there in those days there was lots of disease because it's not good to live next to waste. We like to ship it out somewhere away from where we're living and eating and sleeping. And a flush toilet was a revolution. Not many people had them, only wealthy people did. Nobody had running water, but wealthy had it. In Britain, the first flush toilet, yeah. The first steam heat in France in 1777. Before that, it was all wood heat, mostly coal heat. Lots of fires in those days. Entire cities burned down because of accidents of fires in the house. And then transportation started changing. Up until now, it was mostly you walk, or if you're lucky to have a horse. If you're really lucky, you have a horse with a wagon attached. If you wanted to go to town, if it was 3-4 miles away, it would take you 3 hours to get there, 3 hours back. So you didn't go to town often. That's why everybody lived close to town. That's why they lived in the towns. Suburbs was not a thing even heard of or thought about. That comes with the automobile later on, where people moved way out and where they're working from the cities. That's all changing again because people, young people, millennials and Gen Z are living in the cities, living in the hub of things. They don't want to commute. I don't blame them. Anyway, so now we've got steam heat. People are getting more comfortable. We're getting more used to comforts like running water in our houses, flush toilet, a bicycle to get onto to go to the store. That's pretty nice. In the midst of all this, art world was changing drastically. There was a rebellion against Rococo style of architecture and paintings. That is a style that was kind of fancy, very decorative for wealthy people and the aristocracy, but not for common man. They couldn't afford it. And so, and it was hugely popular throughout all of Europe until neoclassical architecture, neoclassical paintings started making an inroads. You can see neoclassical architecture in America now, because now we've jumped the Atlantic Ocean. We're a settled nation. Jefferson is going to be president soon. And so we're building buildings in America, in the East Coast, Boston, New York, Providence. And what are we going to do? Come up with our own style? Not yet. We're copying what's going on in Europe. So a lot of our buildings, has anybody here ever been to Boston, Cambridge? You should go back there one day. It's our oldest city, really one of the oldest, if not the oldest, where a lot of the architecture is still there. Hasn't all been torn down for a new strip mall yet. There's time. And so you can see these old buildings that date back to the 1700s in this country. And they were modeled after European buildings. And a lot of it was this new classical. Neo simply means new. It's a fancy word to say new classical. And so, and you can see samples of that in your book on like page, let's see, I got the architecture on page 890, 189, and America on 191. Classical paintings is a great example on 186. If you have those in your book, you don't have the book, sorry, you don't get to see them. But you'll see that they're trying to go back to classical images without too much religion put in there. And they're almost like looking at a movie as realistic as they could get it, telling a story. We're not talking about portraiture here. We're talking about painting cities, bustling markets, where people actually lived, and depicting that. And people loved it because it depicted who we are. And it showed that we're not alone. It showed that we're all connected somehow together. The Netherlands are connected to Rome, and Rome is connected to Paris, and Paris is connected to London, and London is connected to the United States of America, a new country. It's connecting the dots, which is really important. That's what a lot of this historical background I'm trying to give you guys. Connecting the dots. How did we get here from there? This is a survey class. We can't dwell on much detail. So it's a survey. We're taking the short route. And I'm not covering other continents. We're not really covering Asia much, not yet. We will be writing about Russia literature soon, which also changed the course of who we are. But not yet. Right now, we're in Europe still. And on this last go around, I want you to look at the documentary. I'll post it. It's on music. Where does music come from? You think you know? unless you're taking music at Shasta College or wherever. Maybe you've grown up with it. It's a BBC documentary, which is excellent. Where does tone, where do musical notes come from? How do we put them together to make a harmonious sound that makes us feel something, that tells our story? It connects us to the next person that we'll never meet. Music is that powerful. And then probably at the end of the week, your fourth essay is going to be on a classical musician. You're looking forward to that. I'm sure you are, but I won't assign it till the end of the week because you're still working on your uh, Dutch painters, I believe. And hopefully you guys saw my sample of the uh, journal. That's what it should look like. That's a good one. Don't do a bad one. I know you won't. Because it's 10 points. It's 10 easy points. If it looks as good as that journal, the sample. If it's one or two sentences with no reflection, you won't get the points because you haven't put any effort in on it. In this class, I'm trying to make you guys put in the effort. I know it's hot out. I know it's summer school. I know you're probably bored with all this Shakespeare and all this other stuff, but it's exciting. The reason why it's exciting is because I'm giving you a basis on where we are in our culture. And where are these people in their culture? What's going on in Mozart's time that allows him to write what he wrote? Well, the culture has to be conducive to the art. If we're a constant warring culture, if there's constant plague and famine, we're not getting much art done, are we? And so this era coming out of the Renaissance is a golden era of human beings on the planet Earth before we polluted all the rivers and made it hot in Canada. It's still cold in Canada in these days. What do you think? I'm going to have you guys start a discussion on music. I want to know your relationship to music. I don't care what it is. What is your relationship? Do you have one? Is it just pop culture music? That's fine. I understand that. Does it go beyond that? Does anybody here actually listen to classical music? Does anybody know Beethoven's Fifth Symphony? I bet you do. You've heard it because it's been on movies and television since the beginning of movies and television. You've probably heard this stuff without even knowing where it came from or who wrote it. And now you're going to maybe fill in those gaps. Maybe you like folk music. Maybe you like rock and roll, punk rock. Oh, yeah. Maybe you like jazz. We're going to get into that later, but this is just the beginning. It all starts in this era. Mozart and Beethoven are creating a musical landscape. And don't tell me you haven't heard of Metallica. They're still copying Beethoven in their own way. Hard to believe, but yes. And with that, I'll leave it to you. Look at the documentary. I'll assign it. Start the conversation, your relationship to music. Stay cool somehow. It's going to be hot for the next and foreseeable future as far as my cell phone looks. 105, 109 every day from now until the end of time, possibly. What if it never cools down? Interesting. Okay, so hope you guys are doing something enjoyable. Hope you enjoyed some aspect of your weekend, got wet maybe at the lake, went down the river in a raft, took a walk, walked your dog, walked your kids, walked your friends, didn't walk, stayed inside, rode a bike, I don't know, rode a horse, do something. Do something to cleanse your mind of what's out there. finding a job and high rents. We know it's out there. All right. On that happy note, I'll see you next time as Story Humanities continues.